In this video we're going to look at the basic structure of JSON itself. Let me just start a new file, blank file for no reason. How the structure of JSON works is its key value pairs. So if, for example, I've got a name and that name of the person is John, there you go, I've got the key being name and the value being John. Now both of these are strings, so I would need to enclose them in strings. We can't have variables, we would end up with an error in our statement. We wouldn't need quote marks if we were using numbers. That at the moment is not correctly formatted JSON. All I would need to do is wrap those up in a set of curly braces. Name is John. Okay, there we go. Now that is a JSON string that is being returned. That's what we are aiming to perform. Obviously we're not going to be typing them in all the time. We're going to get information from databases or whatever, and we're going to use PHP to manage that and format them. But what I want to show you here is just a little bit about JSON. So again, we've got all of this data behind us. It's rather a lot, it's rather confusing, so I'm going to keep it really simple. One thing that I do need is something called a JSON validator, which will help me, particularly when I'm in Python or a language, understand the structure of all of that data. So I'm going to type in here JSON validator. There's one particular site that I tend to use all the time, which is a validator and formatter. There we go. JSON validator and formatter. It's nice and easy to use, and it lets you see the structure of your code. So what you do is you paste the code, your JSON code, in here, and then you press process, and it gives you what the structure is. So I'm going to take this to begin with. So I'm going to copy that, go back to my JSON data and formatter, and I'm going to paste it in there. There we go. And I'm going to press process. And what it does is it gives me a better view of the information. So here I've got name, John, and notice the curly braces. It's just making it look a little bit different. So let's go back to our JSON. If I wanted another name in there, such as Fred, all I need to do is separate each key value pair with a comma. So there we go. Separated it with a comma, and now I've also got something called name, and don't forget it's key value pair, so we separate that with a colon, and then Fred. Job done. And if I click process, we'll see what happens. There we go. So now I've got two rows: name John, name Fred, and every time I sort of put another comma in here, so let's just bring this one up to speed. Name Fred, so that's the same thing that we did. Every time I put a comma in, I am separating the data out. All the validator is doing is placing them in order. Now, what would happen if I wanted, say for example, the name being the first name and the last name? Okay. What I would need there is an array or a list, as you're used to in Python. So instead of just put in the John, I'm going to type it separately on a separate line so you can see it. Instead of just putting John and then Fred, I'm going to have John Smith, Fred Blogs. The way I do it is pretty much the same thing. I give name as my key, and then the value is, instead of it being just a string with John, I'm going to have an array of two values. So I'm going to use my square brackets to indicate that it's an array or a list, and inside there I'm going to do what I did above, which is have the open and closing braces, and I'm going to have the first name, okay, as John. Now you're going to have to bear with me a little bit here. It's going to be not complicated, just difficult to see. And I'm going to separate that as I did on the previous line where I had name, John, name Fred. This time I'm going to have comma because I'm going to have a second item, and this time I'm going to have last name. Separate that into key value pairs, and the value that I want is John Smith. Okay, so I've now got an array consisting of two, or a list consisting of two items, a first name item and a last name item, with the values being John and Smith. So I'm going to copy that line and I'm going to paste it back in my validator, and you can see what happens with this. So if I just paste it in there and then process it, that's how it works. So I've got name, open an array or a list, close it, and then I've got the first name and I've got the last name. So that is taking something that is pretty difficult to read, and if we take a look at this, you've got to admit that is pretty difficult to read, but we can sort of copy it and paste that into our validator. So I'm trying to look now for something that I could do. I would have to copy and paste the whole load of the code. It would be rather difficult. So let's see if I can just copy it up to that point there. Control C. Let's go back to my validator and paste that into there. And click process. And there we go. It's formatted the data into something that I can understand and I can read and I can make sense of in my programming when I need to capture what these values are. Okay, so that is what JSON looks like. You're going to use it in combination with the formatter and validator, and the usefulness of that will be shown later. JSON is just a string. Okay, all we've got to do is produce this string. We could type it in just as I've done, or we could use program techniques to actually build it, and it's the program techniques to build it that I will be interested in. What we're going to be doing mainly is, instead of going to a street crimes database, an API on the internet, we're going to create our own database consisting of our own values, and we're going to perform some sort of SQL statement on it so that we can pull from our own database and produce our own API.